Okay, so now that we found Peter, we can continue. It's time to talk about a new data standard, the strategic advantages of official API integrations for the electric vehicle ecosystem. It's my pleasure to welcome Peter Wilson, co-founder and CEO at Volteras. Please give him a big applause. Thank you. The stage is yours.
No. Is better now?
Yeah.
Cool. Great. So today I'm going to talk to you all about the differences between official and unofficial data in the energy ecosystem. For a lot of you, you may not be aware that there are differences between energy data and also where the data comes from. This can be likened to sort of like a Spotify approach, where there are some players like ourselves who are integrating officially with automakers and energy device makers, and there are other ones who are taking the data through reverse engineered means. And whether you're a utility, whether you work for an energy company, or whether it's the case that you're somehow involved in the EV ecosystem, this is something that you should be very aware of when it's the case that you're thinking about your supplier and where the data comes from. So just a bit of background on us and what we do. We are an API that aggregates and standardizes data across OEMs. We integrate data from the likes of Tesla, BMW, Mini. We also integrate things that EVs interact with, everything from solar inverters to HVACs to different energy devices like chargers. And the idea is that when you zoom out, all of these different DERs are just simply part of the energy ecosystem, and that utilities would be interested in controlling these in the future when we're looking at the smart grid and being able to do things like demand response and load balancing and so on. So to dive a bit deeper on our background, so we are funded by Exor, which is the Ferrari fund, and we also officially integrate with over 20 OEMs. Let's take a second just to talk about kind of where we came from and also how we ended up in this space. So we started out by building a charging app a couple of years ago, and essentially we allowed people to search, navigate, and pay for all the chargers in Europe. While we were doing this, we were using a lot of players at the time that were data aggregators, and we found that there were two types of company. There was one that was reverse engineering all the APIs, meaning that they were getting the data through non-OEM approved ways, which was causing the data to have a much lower and slower throughput. And there were also other companies that were just focused on vehicles, so they weren't focused on the EV ecosystem as a whole. So we took a step back and we were thinking, well, if we're having all of these issues, how many other companies are also going to have these issues in the future? And if it's the case that they're having those issues, well, then somebody needs to solve them. So that's where we come in. We decided to build an API that we would have wanted to have used were it the case that we were available at the time. And that's what the inception of Volteras. So basically what we do is that we handle the entire supply chain on the data side. We reach out to OEMs, we work with them to not only integrate APIs, but also to build the APIs with them. We handle all of the labor costs, all the data costs, all of the energy costs, and basically we bring everything under one singular roof. And the output is that it takes a couple of weeks to integrate our API, and you get access to over 20 OEMs in the ecosystem, whereas it would take a utility or an individual years to do this by themselves. So just to be very clear about what we are and we are not, we are a data aggregator, we are an API, we aggregate all of the APIs, and we do not build applications, we do not build SaaS. That is what our customers do. They build on top of us and use our data in order to build things like smart charging and demand response and load balancing applications. So now to get to the crux of the talk. There are two types or ways that you can get data in this ecosystem. There is official data and there is unofficial data. For those of you who are not aware of the difference, unofficial data means that there are companies that reverse engineer the apps of OEMs. For example, if any of you have a Tesla in the room today, there are companies that take the data from the Tesla app, whereas we take the data from the Tesla API. And the difference is in terms of quality, in terms of security, and in terms of what the OEMs want is drastic. So if we're looking at the capabilities here, you can see that, for example, with a German OEM, if you're looking at the reverse engineered API, a company could get data every hour. Whereas if you're looking through the official API, they can get it every couple of seconds. If you imagine a scenario where any of you are working in a utility and you want to understand smart charging or load balancing and want to be able to control the grid, the difference between an hour and a couple of seconds is absolutely massive. And further still, there are differences between the actual quality of the data and what the OEMs approve. The OEMs who work with us have service level agreements which we pass on to our customers, which means that we're able to guarantee the uptime and the standard of the service. Any company who's reverse engineering the APIs does not have this facility, which means that there's a very likelihood that the API will go down, and it's the case there's nothing they can do about that. Now, if we're looking at, you may all be thinking here, well, this is great, there's a performance difference, but what is the concrete, what's the punchline here? Well, the punchline is that whether you like it or not, you are going to have to switch to official APIs in the coming weeks. As of April, Tesla has decided to shut down anybody who is using reverse engineered APIs. Furthermore, they're going to legally pursue people who are using the reverse engineered APIs as well, which means that this is imminent. If you look at the post here by Tesla themselves, you can clearly see that they are taking this very seriously. Anybody who is continuing to be seen to be using the reverse engineered APIs will not have access to the official API going forward. So the final bit that you should be aware of as well is that, again, if you're working in a utility, if you have a portfolio company that's in the energy space, the #1 priority should always be around security and the quality of the data. When we work with OEMs like this, what we look at is end-to-end encryption, meaning that when you enter your credentials into any API like us, that we do not see them. Everything is OAuth, which means that it's all covered and protected by the OEM. And it's the case that if you're working with a reverse engineered API, that none of this is applicable, meaning that they can see your credentials, they can take your data, and it's essentially none of it is backed by the OEM. So in terms of Volteras, we cover over 20 OEMs, many of them you have heard. These are all official partnerships that we work with, and it's the case that we're able to provide this with all of our customers. We are continuing to grow our coverage, and in the coming months, we'll be up to about 23 or 24 OEMs. And that spans across everything from electric vehicles to DERs like solar inverters, chargers, home batteries, and HVACs as well. So in terms of the use cases, you may all be sitting here and be like, great, I understand now the difference between official and unofficial data, but what does this mean for me or my business? And this is where the reality sets in. So we help companies that are in the virtual power plant space. We help them be able to control the data from their SaaS, essentially, and they can start and stop charging. They can aggregate all of the different DERs together to be able to understand and control different APIs through us. We also do things like smart charging. So aside from just getting data from the APIs, you're also able to literally control devices like electric vehicles. So you can start and stop the charge remotely. You can see how many kilowatt hours are going into a vehicle at a given time. And you're able to basically do this on scale, whether it be an application or a SaaS that you're building. Then in terms of EV rentals and ride sharing, you're able to do things like open and close the doors of the car. You're able to start and stop the car remotely. You're able to look at things like even the battery health of the vehicle as well, all through the API. And then finally, for things like DER management, you're able to then take your application to the next level of not just showing people analytics around the API, but actually being able to add on features which take the application to a more of a service-based approach. So in terms of how does all this work? So essentially the first part is a consent flow. This is how we interact with the end customer, and we ask the user or owner of the DER to enter their credentials. This is how they enter the credentials, and then they enter the username and password, and again, this is all OAuth through the likes of, let's say, Tesla. Then it's the case that you select your brand, and you choose which OEM that you want to pick. Then it's the case that you go into the login, and then you check the permissions, and that's it. That means that you're able to get data from any of your customers within a couple of seconds, and it's the case that you can start using all these use cases on top of that. So just a small bit about us in the media. We've been featured in TechCrunch. We've won awards for responsible AI from automotives like Altair, and it's the case that we are now looking to raise another funding round if any of you are investors and would like to reach out. Thank you very much for your time.